I'm Rogers Anderson, Williamson County's mayor, and today we start a different show, a different title, and we'll have some special editions. And the very first person that we wanted to introduce to the community under our new Get to Know Our Williamson County Residents is our own Williamson County historian, Virginia Bowman. Welcome. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
And thank you for agreeing to come on the show.
Hope you're well.
I'm doing fine.
Good.
Our purpose of having these series of conversations with different people in our community is to know a little bit about Virginia Bowman, a little bit about your past, and some of the things that you have contributed to here in Williamson County. Now, that's a lot of material we've got to cover, but at the same time, I want you to have plenty of time to talk and tell us all about the things that are important to you and where we have come from. I know we're not going to ask people their ages, and we're not going to go there with those types of things, but I do know that you've had a wonderful contribution to our community. And one of the things later on the general public will get to see is what's directly behind you. You had a direct involvement in developing the Williamson County Seal. But first of all, tell us a little bit about Virginia Bowman.
Well, I was born in Centerville, Tennessee, where my mother's parents lived, Mr. and Miss T.K. Colley. And of course that was just a temporary home for me, you know. And then we came back to Franklin to my daddy's farm. I've been and stayed there till I married. Moved across the Lewisburg Pike, and still in that same location.
And you were very fortunate, and right before we went on the show, you were telling me you've got two children. I think probably most everybody in Williamson County knows one of them.
Well,
and Jody.
Jody, and my daughter Collie.
And Collie lives in Nashville.
She lives in Nashville.
And now, grandchildren? How many grandchildren do we have?
Twin grandsons, Jody's boys. And they're grown and married, and they've got children of their own. Have a little great-granddaughter, Elizabeth Virginia. I have a little great-grandson, William Lane Bowman.
Well, the Bowman name's going to be carried on for several years then.
I hope so.
I know that one of my first involvements with you, outside of knowing that you had done the seal, you have a great love not too far from the 4th Avenue Church of Christ building of the cemetery. And I know you've spent countless hours into helping to develop the names of that cemetery. Lou
Fame Major and I worked so hard out in the country, you know. And I said, one day we were dragging tombstones back in this fence where somebody tossed them outside, you know. I said, Lou Fane, I don't work this hard at home. I said, why are we out here dragging tombstones around? But we really did. We worked so hard on those cemeteries. Well, a lot of them are gone.
When you say gone, literally been
destroyed.
Destroyed. Mm-hmm. Now the cemetery that's down a couple of blocks off from Hillsborough Road, tell us a little bit about that cemetery.
Well, you mean which one? There's two down there. Old City Cemetery is the oldest.
That's correct.
It's the one that most eastern.
Right.
And then the other one is Rest Haven, and that came when the other one got full.
How far back, or when did those dates kind of start in the city cemetery?
Very, very early. And they made the mistake, you see, of building in the floodplain. I mean, putting the cemetery in the floodplain there. Once in a while, they'd wash up a casket. Did Mr. John B. Mckinnon. And Sam Fleming and his mother had him reinterred in a nice casket, put his little belongings back, his cufflinks and everything, you know. It's real sad that they did that. And the first church, Presbyterian Church, was down there. And it was flooded all the time. That's when they came up on Main Street.
Well, you've seen a lot of changes, and the city cemetery went to, now what was the name of that, the next?
Oh, the first one was Old City.
The Old City.
And Nashville has Old City, and we have Old City. And then the next one, I've forgotten when it started, but it may be in the 1870s, was Rest Haven.
Now, can people still be buried in those?
I don't know if there's enough room to or not. I really don't know. Every once in a great while, Within the last 50 years, someone would be buried there, but I don't know about it now.
But most of the graves now are identified.
Well, tell you what happened. The city had a very bad way when the cemetery got overgrown with sage grass, and it was dry in the fall. They'd burn it, and that sage grass, was just like little wooden sticks, and the tombstones would pop. It would pop off the inscriptions and everything. And when that happened, they'd just send a wagon in there with a tractor, and they'd pick up the tombstones and throw them in the wagon and haul them off. So that's why all those empty spaces are. We don't know who's there.
Ms. Bowman, I know that you could talk from early morning to the evening.
Nobody ever wants to hear me, and I don't get to talk. My children just get their eyes glazed over, so I don't have anybody to talk to much.
Tell me some of the changes, and good and bad, of our community and some of the things that are important to you. I know that there's so many things that you have had a finger in, and I'm going to have to ask you to do a little bragging now, do a little talking.
What do you mean? I was going to talk about the Hoppy River.
I would love for you to talk about that too.
Well, the rises are so different now. We don't hardly ever have a big rise. And I was just making some notes out of some old diaries and things, and the river is so deceptive. You can walk across it sometimes, not get your feet wet, and then again it's just a raging torrent. And people don't honor it, don't pay attention to it, let alone love it. It's just something in the way sometimes, to get the trash out of here. But it said in the rainy season it can become a raging torrent, humming ominously to itself as it rises. If you've ever stood and listened to that river when it's rising and hear that hum, and logs and debris floating down it, it's scary, because it's coming out of there and there's no telling where it'll go. But we don't have those big rises anymore. But in his diary, Dr. Samuel Henderson said one of the biggest rises was December the 10th through the 13th in 1847, and then there was another one in 1848, and it was higher than anybody ever remembered it. And I tell you what happened. It would get above the fences, and anything that tried to use a canoe or something to get around, they'd get hung up in those fences. You couldn't see the fence posts or anything. You didn't know they were there. And it was just, so dangerous. And then the highest one ever, they thought, was in 1808. That's the biggest one the old folks could remember. And in April 1850, it was almost a repeat of 1848. And then in 1859, Dr. Henderson thought it was higher than it had been in 40 years.
Now that was in 1850.
1859, on December the 7th. And then turnpike bridges, he said they were nearly all gone. Some of them were stone. But it didn't matter. When that river got up, it carried everything away with it. And some carried away rock fences, everything. And the bad part about that one, it was so late, and it was in April, and the ground had been plowed for spring planting, and it was soft, and it just carried away that topsoil. And then there was big rises in January 1918, January 1937. I remember that one. That's when Louisville flooded so bad, and the warehouses in Nashville. I remember that one. February 1948, I remember that one. I never saw such a rise before. That's the biggest one in my memory. And then March 1975, January 1990, it was out of Banks, and then it was out of Banks during the blizzard in 1951 and froze out. And when they said that, I didn't get to see it because I had a little baby at home. I didn't get out much. But he couldn't get out any. Joe had to walk to town to get something to eat, cross the fields, because he couldn't go the road. But he said that when they went through there with the bulldozers, to open Lewisburg Pike, it looked like what you would imagine Russia would look like, great banks of ice on either side.
And that was in the
1951.
51.
It was I can't remember the date. It was in the 1951 though, and froze out of Banks. And it was out of Banks Christmas Day in 1987 when those 3 people drowned. They ran into it. They just don't, they were out at night, And the water's very deceptive. The light shining on it doesn't show that it's water. And
Well, let me ask you something about the Harpeth, and you made reference to it. I know a lot of effort now has been under flood control and under some Harpeth, well, the Harpeth River Watershed is a good example of the organization that helps to control the usage of the river, as well as I don't know that they control the flooding process of it, but I know the cities and the counties each have their own flood management control areas. But when you look back in time, and the Harpeth has always played a vital role in the area of Franklin.
yeah, it has. It has.
And for many, many years, I know we were coming up the elevator up here to the taping of this show, and you were sharing with me some thoughts on you know, the springs, the wells that we have all throughout our county, and there's still a lot of our people that get their main source of water from that.
They do. Of course, it's very important they have them tested, because with all these subdivisions around, you know, you don't know where your water's coming from.
How about some other changes
Well,
in
one
town?
other changes I wanted to talk about was the weather. How much the weather has changed. Just in my lifetime, we always killed hogs for Thanksgiving. Always had a good spell and killed. Don't want to kill when it's too cold. Don't want the meat to freeze, you know, when it's outside cooling. But Dr. Andrew Ewan said that the hogs could be killed by November the 1st in December of 1845. And there was 6 or 8 inches of snow was on the ground for a week, and ice was being cut off of ponds for storage in ice houses that early.
In
You see that?
the early November part.
Early November. The thickest ice he had ever seen for 15 years was cut on December the 17th, 1851. Ground frozen hard by November the 15th, 1852. We don't see that anymore. On March the 17th, 1892, Judge John Henderson recorded the deepest snowfall he had ever remembered. And it caught wheat in the bloom. It had been mild, caught wheat in the bloom and everything, and they had to get in there and mow it down before it went to seed. You know, it was just terrible.
You think a lot of the weather conditions and times are a result of us as changing the
Well, it
atmosphere?
doesn't sound like it from this, because they didn't have any way to do anything, and there wasn't all that much manufacturing going on, you know. So I don't know, but that's what those men said, and they have to take their word for it, because they were smart people. And just interesting to see how our weather has changed.
Well, I know I moved here, and family and I moved here in 1980, and we've seen some flooding, but not like you were talking about there. I have seen the water get up over the Harpeth, get out of the Harpeth banks and cover Hillsborough Road, and certainly get all down around 2nd Avenue down in that area.
Get down in the locker, when the locker used to be down there.
Down in the locker. Well, you might tell people what a locker is. Now, very
The
few
locker's
people.
where you rented little boxes to put your frozen meat in, because they didn't have freezers at home.
And now, where was that located at in Franklin?
It's down there near J.C. Anderson's laundry. J.C. his son's laundry.
It's
laundry.
and they really rented.
And I was scared to death to go in there. I was always scared the door would shut and I'd freeze to death. It's cold in there.
Who ran the locker service? Was that
You just went in and got your stuff out. I don't know who did it. I don't know. I never thought about it.
Did they rent them to individuals? And so
Little
you
boxes, individual boxes.
And
You get down in there and pour around, your hands freezing, you know. It's terrible. Now we all have freezers, which I enjoy thoroughly.
And how about some of the other things that have occurred different? I mean, not many people would understand. I've heard my grandmother speak of a locker box where she lived from, and that's the only reason I knew that term. But you know, refrigerators. I guess the first one was really called a Frigidaire.
Yeah,
And,
had the big old thing up on the top.
Had it on the top. I'm not sure when it came
I
along,
don't either.
but I do know that it was one of those modern conveniences, that and the washing machine and some of those things that were very, very important.
My grandmother said she lived in Centerville on 100, and when we'd go down there on 100 Highway,
Yes, ma'am.
she said nothing gave her more pleasure than to see a washing machine sitting on the front porch, so the lady wouldn't have to be using the washboard and wringing it by hand, you know. She liked that.
It was tough times back in the 1700s, 1800s, and even early 1900s. For not just all people, but sometimes, I mean, the men worked long and hard out in the fields, and the women worked in those fields too, but their chores were still needed for cooking and cleaning and raising the family.
Making the clothes.
Making the clothes.
You had to card the wool, shear the sheep and card the wool and spin the thread and weave it and then cut it out and sew it behind.
And have you done most of that?
No, I haven't. I always had an electric sewing machine. I was sewing one Sunday afternoon. I blew the main transformer out on Lewisburg Pike, and I never did know how I did it. Dave Mckinnon called me. He said, "Virginia, what have you done? What are you doing? You blew the main transformer out on Lewisburg Pike." I said, that's not here nor there, none of your business. I said, you just get out here and fix it before Joe gets home.
Well, now, David Mckinnon, that's an interesting name. Of course, David passed away a couple of years ago.
We went to school together.
And David was a county commissioner for a long time, and he was, of course, at the hospital, Williamson Medical Center Hospital Board CEO, and a very colorful and a character.
Yeah, he was
indeed at that. But a man that could have a story almost for every event.
But I said my daddy would never let me sew on Sunday. You know, that's bad. You can sew on Sunday. So he was gone. He was dead, and I said, well, I'll just sew. And
And you blew the transformer out when you sewed on Sunday? I probably ought not to go much further with this conversation.
But I never did. I was just sewing.
How about transportation? How'd you get around in those early days? Walk, mule, horse?
We had an old Model A Ford, Model T, I guess, and then we had other cars coming along. We always had a car to get in and out. Before we get too far along, I want to talk about history stuff.
Please.
I want to talk about a conversation I had with Herbert Harper, who was executive director of the Tennessee Historical Commission and a very dear friend of mine for many, many years. And he told me one time, he said, I want to tell you something. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it. He said, there are 2 degrees of recognition for sites with historical significance. The National Register of Historic Places, which we're all familiar with, and then the National Historic Landmarks. That's the highest degree of honor that a site can receive. And the state of Tennessee only has only 27 historic landmarks, and 5 of them are right here in Franklin.
For an example?
Well, the battlefield.
Battlefield.
And under the covering of the battlefield, we have the on the National Historic Landmark, the Carter House, Fort Granger, Winstead Hill, Carnton, and the McGavock Confederate Cemetery. That's all connected with the Battle of Franklin. And they are described in the record. And the Confederate monument on the square is on the National Register of Historic Places as part of the Downtown Historic District. We hope someday to get it on as a national monument, but I don't know what that involved. Mr. Herbert Harper died either last year or year before last, and it's gone to his position now. It's under the care of Patrick McIntyre, and he's doing a good job. And but just think of Franklin having 5 historic landmarks and nobody knows or cares. You ever hear of it?
Well, I have, only because you've mentioned it to me before, but I know very little bit about it. And I know there's a lot of, I didn't realize there was only just that few in the entire state of Tennessee, and we had 5 of them.
Yeah, 5 of them.
Talk to me before you go into some of the others. Tell me about the downtown centerfold, or the center of the town. How was most of that? The monument. Can you give me a little history on that?
No, I can't. You'd have to ask the Heritage Foundation about that. I don't know what it covers, but most all of the old homes downtown.
Yes, ma'am.
It was a very well-designated district of the original town of Franklin. And I don't know whether they've gone outside of it or not, but it was very contained. And you know, there's 2 margin streets, South Margin, well, maybe more. South Margin, North Margin, right here in town. I mean, it's close in.
Right.
But there's so many beautiful homes. Of course, we've lost more than we got left. And the one that I remember being torn down was on the corner of 5th Avenue and I guess North Margin, and it was the Cohen house. Mr. Ernest, Mr. Charlie Cohen, or Wilbur Cohen, I forget who owned it. It was Cohen house. And I didn't know it was being torn down. I wasn't into what I am now as much as I am today, but I was interested in old houses. And we drove by it on Sunday morning. I just let out a scream and began to cry and carry on. The children laid down on the back seat. They were so embarrassed, you know. And that really started the historic preservation. When people saw that people would just go in and tear something down, nobody could stop it.
Now, about what year was that?
Must have been in the 60s, something like that. 70s maybe.
There's, you know, there's still a strong need, and when we think of historical areas in Franklin, and of course I only see what's there and what's been preserved today. You and many others that we will have on this show will know much more of the history of this town than I will ever know. But you'll also remember that house, for an example, that was torn down.
I have a good picture.
And have a good mental photo. And that's really what we want to do with this show, is try to get as much and capture as much of this history and that we've got, so that we have a memory of it. But a bigger thing is to be able to share it with the next generations.
I'll tell you one of the pretty ones we lost. It's all been torn up now. It was back of the Mr. Pig and Mr. what was the other man's name in the National Harvester Company? It was the Sykes house there, and it had a beautiful red fan light. It was brick, had a beautiful yard and a little lacy fence around it. Now they just went in there and bulldozed that thing. Nothing, never thought about it, said about it. It would have been such a beautiful sight now. And another one was right there on 5th Avenue and Main Street, and that was the James Harrison house. Beautiful, beautiful house. It didn't stand for about 30 years, and they just went in there and tore it down.
Were most of the early homes, was there any one individual did a lot of this building here in town, or was it different men and women, or different men that came to town and built homes out of Nashville and other parts of the...
Well, most of them, a lot of them were right here in the county, and they had money, and they built the houses. It takes money even then, back then, you know, to build these big houses and to keep them up, because somebody had to tend those fireplaces all day long, you know, to keep the house warm. And that's why usually why they were torn down, they were just so inconvenient. Everybody wanted a new house. But that was right there, I don't know what's there now, right across from Starbucks, on the same side of the street.
I know the area that you're talking about.
What's he saying?
He's saying, the guy that just opened the door is saying that we got about 5 minutes.
Oh,
so
well, you talk about what you want to now.
Well, no, I want to talk about what you do, but I do want us to touch on what's behind you, is the seal. Can you give us a little history on that seal?
I sure can. Mr. James Hannah Armstead and my husband were childhood friends and remained friends all their lives. And he came out home one day. He came fairly often to visit. And he said, I want to do a county seal. Well, I didn't know what he was talking about. You know, I knew the state seal. And he said, well, give me an idea. And I said, well, we need 4 or 5 things and pictures of them. And that's what we chose. We chose agriculture and, let me see what we had, agriculture, religion, history, and education. And you can see them on there. And that little schoolhouse is the Douglas School. It was a little frame schoolhouse. It's gone now.
Where was it located?
It was at Henpeck Lane and Lewisburg Pike.
All right.
Right there. And he said, well, that's good. Said, and we decided what we wanted in each quadrant. And he said, I'll take this down to the Banner where he was editor, and we will. I'll have my graphic artist draw it. And so there it is.
And so.
And then he presented it to the county court. I've forgotten the date, and they accepted it.
Well, it was the actual date that it was incorporated, was accepted, was July the 15th, 1968, which was kind of symbolic of this show, that it has been 30, almost 30 years since you had your finger involved in this. And just recently we put together a pamphlet with some phone numbers and things that people can use, and we thought it was most appropriate that almost to the date that we would be seeing this and having you.
It's a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing, and very few people realize that that is. It's incorporated on our flag. I don't know if they can pick this up, that the Williamson County flag. We have put that together, and we're very proud of it. We want to say thank you for the hard work you did on that seal.
I didn't have anything to do hard work with. Hadn't had James Hanna, it wouldn't have been here.
We've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. What would you like to talk about in the closing? Any of your comments or your notes, your research?
One thing I would like to comment on is when people use historic sites on maps and things, that they'd get it right. It's just terrible to use wrong family names, and they do it all the time.
If people wanted to contact you, they can contact our office, and we can make contact if you've got some, and if you're interested, just call the county mayor's office, 790-5700, and we'll get a hold of Mrs. Bowman for you. I do know that from time to time, if you can coax her out, that she'll even give you a little history lesson. I bet you'd be willing to come down here and talk to some groups from time to time.
I don't know. I don't do much of that. I don't make much. My job as county historian was to preserve county history. And you've done a good job. I'm trying to do it in writing articles on things.
Anything else on there, your notepad, that you wanted to touch on?
No, I believe that's about it.
Well, I want to say again, thank you. Over the next series, over the next several weeks and months, we're going to have different people, different folks that have contributed to our community and are still contributing into our community. And I know you'll know majority of these men and women as they come down the pike. And we encourage people that if you're watching this show and if there's somebody special that you would like to have interviewed, then over the next period of time, then please call us and let us know of an individual that has contributed here to our community, not only Franklin, but all of Williamson County. There are many people from Flat Creek to Brentwood and Fairview to College Grove and all points in between that have contributed to what we know as Williamson County. So thank you again for taking time out, coming out on this.
Thank you for having me.
And sharing with us your history, and thank you for what you have contributed. Again, I'm Rogers Anderson, Williamson County Mayor, and we'll see you next as we have another special edition just very, very soon. Thank you.